Theory Scholars. So in this video, we're going to be looking at resolving root position 5-7 to 1. So if you're already familiar with how to resolve 5 to 1, just the basic triads, then we're set. We just need to add one tiny little piece to that. We need to learn how to work with sevenths of chords. If you need a review of that, see the comments below. You can find the link to just resolving 5 to 1. Watch that, get comfortable with that, and swing back on here. Okay, so I've got our part writing guidelines here laid out, our usual ones, in case you need that as a reference as we're going along here. So we're going to start with a major example first, a nice straightforward example, and then I'm going to show you an example in minor, and this incorporates kind of a quirky thing that happens when we're working with specifically root position 5-7 to 1. There's a case where sometimes we have to have incomplete chords, and I'll show you where that occurs and how to deal with that. Okay, so let's try a basic example first. So we're going to come at this the same way as we did when we were working just with the triads. So in the key of B flat, 5-7 chord, I need to find scale degree 5, that would be an F. So imagine, just visualize on the staff your snowman, right? So I need a chord that has F, A, C, and E flat, since I have my 7th. Okay, and as soon as I write it, I'm actually going to mark in where my tendency tones are at. So the same thing with the 5 triad, I still have the leading tone in this chord. So in the key of B flat, if you imagine B flat on the staff, the leading tone is A, or the third of the 5 chord is always the leading tone. So I know the leading tone is going to need to resolve up. I'm actually going to mark that in with a triangle like this, so I remember that the A is going up. And remember, the leading tone only needs to resolve up when it's in an outer voice. If it's an inner voice, it doesn't necessarily have to. The new bit here is how to deal with the 7th of the chord. So the 7th of the chord, and this isn't just 5 7s, it's any kind of 7th chord, 2 7s, leading tone 7th chords. The 7th of the chord is always going to resolve down by step instead. And this is regardless of voice. So whether it's an inner voice, outer voice, doesn't matter. The 7th of the chord always resolves down. So one thing just to kind of be careful of is when we're talking about the 7th, we're not talking about scale degree 7, the leading tone, but we're talking about the 7th of the chord, and that's something that often gets confused. So just be careful with that terminology. Okay, so let's go ahead and construct our chord in the staff. If it's a root position chord, we know the root needs to go in the bass, so F needs to be in the bass. And then I'm just going to space out the rest of my chords and go right in order. So if I've got an F, I need an A, so maybe I'll put my A here in the tenor, and or the alto, I'm sorry, as soon as I write it, I'm going to mark in the notation here, so I remember that that is the leading tone, and it's going to need to resolve up if it's the outer voice. I don't want to double it. The C is the next note I need, so maybe I'll put the C, let's see, I'll put it here, and I'll do my E flat up, maybe up in the top voice here. And again, as soon as I write E flat, I'm going to mark it with a downward angle, downward triangle. So remember that E flat, 7th of the chord, needs to go down by step. Okay, so before I do anything else, before I even write my 1 chord in, if I'm going to tonic, I need to resolve my tendency tones, because there's really no argument as to what needs to happen with them. So the 7th of the chord, I know, no matter what, regardless of voice, it needs to go down by step. So the 7th I know is going here. Okay, and then my leading tone, if it's in an outer voice, the leading tone, remember, it needs to resolve up by step, but in this case it's in an inner voice, so I actually don't need to resolve it. I'm just going to go ahead and leave it alone. Okay, so now let's spell out the 1 chord. If I'm in the key of B flat, 1 chord, scale degree 1 is here, so I'm going to visualize my snowman. I need a B flat, a D, and an F in this chord then. So root position chord, B flat needs to go in the bass, so I can just go ahead and write my bass note in, and then I can see, okay, in the top I had a D, so I'm going to cross that off. Okay, I'm just going to go in order. So the next note I need is F. So where is the smoothest place to put F? Is it closer to the alto, or is it closer to the tenor? Well, if it was the alto, it would be a skip of a third. The tenor, it actually would be a leap, regardless of where I go. So I know that it's got to be the smoothest place to put it would be in the alto voice. Also, if you happen to see, if I did decide I was going to put it in the tenor, it actually ends up creating a voice leading error for me. Do you see it? If I went down to here, it's going to end up creating parallel fifths if I do that. But regardless, it's not the smoothest place. If you have a leap in one of your voices, usually you're going to end up with some kind of problem somewhere. Okay, anyway, regardless, smoothest place would be to put it in the alto. Okay, so I'm going to cross that off. Okay, now if I have a root position triad, I double the root, right? So I know I need another B flat, so if I double the B flat, last place to put it would be here, and this looks pretty good. So my upper voices are all moving by step, a skip, that looks nice. If you're looking back at it and you see you've got a leap in a voice, consider what you've got and see if there's a different way that you could rewrite that instead. Okay, so I've resolved my tendency tones. Final step is to check for parallels, right? So what I suggest, you start at the top and you just look, you work your way down. So are there any other voices that are moving down by step? I see one other voice that moves down by step. Do you see it? Which one? It's the tenor voice does, right? Both of those voices move down by step. So I need to check the interval between them. So from B up to D is a third, no problem. Parallel thirds are no big deal, so I'm happy with that. I can just keep going. This voice, alto, goes down by third. Does anything else go down by third? Nope, this leaps down. That's a fifth. And so I already checked this voice. I don't need to check against the bass because I'm all set now. Okay, so we've successfully resolved 5/7 to 1 in a major key. Okay, so let's try it in minor, and let's try kind of a slightly different voice leading situation that's going to kind of force our hand here. So if we keep our key signature where we have two flats, the minor key then would be G minor. Okay, so 5/7 to 1 in G minor. Remember the minor, the one chord is a minor chord, so just be careful with your Roman numeral. Okay, so we're going to start by just building your chords. So in the minor key, G minor, scale degree 5 would be D, right? So visualize your snowman on the staff. So I need a D, F, A, C. And then I'm missing one thing. Do you remember what it is? So I know we've got a 5/7 chord here, but just imagine even a 5 chord in the minor key. There's something about an accidental here. I forgot to raise my leading tone, right? So whenever you write a 5 chord, even though we're doing 5/7s now, same rule applies. We need to raise the leading tone. So in the key of G, if you're thinking a half step below G, that would be F sharp, right? Or the other way to think of it is that, remember that the third of the chord is always the leading tone in your 5, so you could just think of raising that up. And I'm going to mark that in again. So the leading tone needs to go up, the 7th of the chord needs to go down. Okay, so let's part rate this. So the root, if it's a root position chord, needs to go in the bass. And then what I'm going to do is actually put the leading tone up here in the soprano. And remember, I need to raise it, and I'm going to go ahead and mark it as soon as I write it, so I'm consciously aware of where it's at. Let's see, maybe we'll put the A. Let's see, what should we do here? A here maybe, and C here. Spaced out, and I'm going to mark my C as my tendency tone as soon as I write it, so I'm aware of where it's at. Okay, so before I do anything else, I need to make sure I resolve the tendency tones, right? So if the leading tone is in an outer voice, it has to resolve up by step, so I know there's no argument that has to go there. Okay, the next bit, the 7th of the chord, regardless of what voice it's in, needs to go down by step, so I have to resolve that there, no argument. Okay, then my 1 chord. So in the key of G, let's spell this out. So there's G, so we're going to visualize our snowman. So I need a G, a B flat, and a D in this chord. Okay, so if it's a root position chord, I know that G has to go in the bass. There's kind of no way around that. Okay, and then if I look at what I've got here, I have a B up here, so I'm going to cross that out. I have a G up in the top, so I'm going to cross that out. Oops, no, that's a G up, that's a G up in the top, so I'm going to cross the doubled note out. So it looks like what I'm missing here is a D, right? Okay, so let's see, I'm going to mark my D in. Well, wait a minute. If I mark a D in, I can have a D here. Boy, that's a leap, right? Or right here. Regardless of what I do, I'm going to end up with this giant leap. And it's actually going to cause me some additional problems. If I leap up to here, I'm going to end up with a spacing issue. If I leap down to here, I end up with a spacing issue here. But either way, I'm going to have this giant leap in one of these voices. But I kind of didn't have a choice, right? Because the leading tone, this had to go up because it was in the outer voice. This had to go down. If it's a root position chord, I didn't have a choice here in the G that had to be there. So there was no other way around this. So this is a case that is always going to happen whenever you are part writing from a root position 5/7 to a root position 1. If you have the leading tone in the top voice, you will always end up with this weird predicament. You're going to have a case where you're going to have a giant leap in one of the voices. So the way around this is to make one of these two chords incomplete. So if you're thinking about, okay, well, I'm looking at the one chord. If I'm going to leave something off, what would I leave off? Well, we don't ever want to leave the root of the chord off because, you can't have a 1 chord without scale degree 1, right? A G chord without G in it. The third of the chord is what really defines the quality of the chord, makes it feel major, makes it minor, and a dominant chord especially, it's where the leading tone is at. So we really don't typically want to leave off the third of the chord. So the best note to leave off in a chord is the 5th of the chord. This doesn't add a lot to the chord, so I can leave the D off and it won't be any problem. So if I'm looking at the 1 chord, what I could do, I've already doubled the root, so I could simply double the third of the chord. And if I do that then, if I double the B flat, and I write it like this, that solves my problem, right? Now I've got steps, I got steps, I got steps, right? This looks good. And if I just double check my voice leading here to make sure I don't have any issues, let's see here. So this went up by step. Anything else? This goes up by step, these two voices. So what's the interval? B to G is a 6th. Let's see, this goes down by step. So this is good. I don't have any issues with parallels. So this is one possible solution. I can leave off the 5th and I could double the third of the chord. So I have a doubled root and a doubled third. The second possibility here is instead of doubling the third of the chord, I can actually triple the root of the chord, believe it or not. So instead of that B, what I would have instead then is a G. So that I've got G, 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 3 Gs and a B flat. Now typically we don't want to do this unless we're at the very end of an example, because you can imagine we've got a whole lot of tonic here, right? So if you do this in the middle of a phrase, it really kind of brings things to a grinding halt, right? So this typically we reserve this kind of tripling of the root for the very end. So you can imagine you have a root position 5/7 to 1 cadence. This would be a fine spot for it. But other than that, you don't usually want to do this. What you're going to want to do typically is double the root, double the third. Okay, so this is option 1. Leave your 5/7, leave your 1 chord incomplete. The other option actually is to leave the 5 chord incomplete and have a complete 1 chord. So let's try and see what this would look like. So I'm going to just, for a moment here, I'm going to get rid of my 1 chord. So if I'm going to leave something off in this 5 chord, I'll just take this back to the beginning here. If I'm going to leave something off in the 5/7 chord, we know we can't leave off the root. We can't leave off the 7th, the third of the chord, because that's my leading tone, and it's the third of the chord. That's the quality here. We can't leave off the 7th because then we don't have a 7th chord, right? We just have a triad. So what we can leave off is, same thing again, we can leave off the 5th of the chord. So we're going to imagine instead we leave the 5th of the chord out. So that's my A. So I'm going to get rid of this A. And then if we're thinking about doubling, what would you double? Well, we know that we don't double tendency tones, right? We don't want to double the F sharp and C because they're tendency tones. We're leaving out the A. So we're always going to double the root when we leave off the 5th and the 7th chord. So if I add another D in here, in this case, if I do a D here, I end up with a spacing issue. If I do one here, then I end up with a spacing issue here, so I need to kind of revoice my chord here a little bit. So I think what I'm going to do instead is maybe flip my C up to here and maybe put the doubled D here instead. So let's see, C is my 7th, so I'm going to mark that here. Okay, so now what have I got? I got D, I got F sharp, I got C, and then I've doubled my D. Okay, so this looks good. Now before I go into the 1 chord, I need to resolve my tendency tones, right? If the leading tone's in an outer voice, it has to go up, no question. The 7th of the chord, regardless of voice, always goes down by step, so this needs to go here. Root position 1, so I'm going to go ahead and part write this. The G has to go in the bass, so I can either go up or down, doesn't matter. So I've now got a G, I've got a B in the alto, I have a G, G up in the soprano, so I'm going to mark that in, double G. Okay, so now the last note left here is D. If I mark a D in, and the missing voice here, it works just fine, right? I've got a nice common tone movement, and so I'm able to get all the notes of the tonic chord in. So that was the second option. So just to kind of review here, So you've got two options when you've got root position 5 to root position 1, and the leading tone is in the soprano. That's specifically where this is going to occur. Is you can either, as we did here, you can have this be an incomplete chord and this be a complete chord, or you can have a complete, or you can have instead a complete 5/7 chord and an incomplete 1 chord. You have to do one of the two, and if you don't, you're going to have weird, some kind of weird part writing issues, or possibly a part writing error somewhere that you don't realize that you've got. All right, so there it is. Part writing, root position 5/7 to 1. Good luck. Happy part writing.